Jim Crow laws were state and local laws enacted in the United States between 1876 and 1965. These laws enforced racial segregation in all public facilities in the southern United States, with a particular focus on the separation of African Americans from whites. The Jim Crow laws were enacted in response to the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, which granted citizenship and voting rights to African Americans. The laws were designed to maintain white supremacy and to deny African Americans equal rights. One of the most important events in the history of Jim Crow laws was the Plessy v. Ferguson decision of 1896. In this case, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation, as long as the facilities provided for African Americans were separate but equal. This doctrine of separate but equal became the legal justification for Jim Crow laws for decades to come. Another important event was the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954. In this case, the Supreme Court overturned the Plessy v. Ferguson decision, declaring that segregated schools were inherently unequal. This decision was a major victory for the civil rights movement and helped to pave the way for the abolition of Jim Crow laws. The Jim Crow laws were finally abolished in the 1960s following the civil rights movement. However, their legacy continues to be felt today in the form of racial inequality in the United States. Here are some of the other important events in the history of Jim Crow laws. The Grandfather Clause 1890. This clause allowed white voters to avoid literacy tests and poll taxes by proving that their grandfathers had voted before 1867. The White Primary 1890. This was a practice in which political parties in the South excluded African Americans from participating in primaries. The Separate Car Act 1890. This law required African Americans and whites to ride in separate railway cars in the South. The Literacy Test 1890. This test required voters to pass a literacy test in order to vote. The Grandfather Clause 1910. This clause was revived in some southern states after it was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. This law prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. This law prohibited racial discrimination in voting. The Jim Crow laws were a dark chapter in American history. They denied African Americans their basic rights and contributed to the poverty and segregation that continue to plague many African American communities today. However, the civil rights movement helped to abolish these laws and to bring about a more just and equitable society.